All right, so here we are, the first episode of Words with Wordsmiths, and we have Sean Luther and myself, Lebaff. So, in our little pre-talk that we had, Sean, you wanted to, well, let's start with how long have you been writing? Let's start there. Easy ones.
Awesome, awesome. We'll start with the easy question. Good, good. So I've been writing a little close to 10 years. And when I say that, I haven't been necessarily publishing writings, but that's where it all started. About 10 years ago, I was going through some things in life, and a great outlet was just writing. And one day I was watching TV, and I said, you know what, I can make stories like these. And so I started just making my own characters. Then from there, putting these characters into stories. And after a while, I used to put them in little teeny notepads and write the stories out. And before I knew it, I had all of these notepads full of stories. And so one day I decided, well, I gotta do something with this, right? And so that's how the actual books came about, was that I took those stories and actually made them into a digital format, and then about self-publishing them.
That's awesome. So, just real quick, how many books did you say you've written?
So far, I've written 5. There's the Concrete Power series, which is a 3-book series. Then there is a one-off that dives into the darker side of mental health called The Last Night. And then there is my venture into psychological thriller, which is My Good Little Girls.
And I know that we wanted to talk about mental health a little bit, so let's segue into The Last Night.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about that. You said that's an exploration of the darker side of mental health.
Correct.
And hit me with it. What do you got with that?
So with that book, I was thinking about how over years we've seen on TV where, people have unfortunately committed suicide, things of that nature, over things where you kind of looked and said, I wonder what happened there. I wonder why they did that. So this book kind of dives into a piece of the why. I also use my instances that have happened in my own life in that book, where the main character had big dreams, aspirations of being a teacher, and unfortunately his life took a dramatic turn. And in that book, you go through his life. He doesn't, of course, have the job that he dreamed of being a teacher, and he unfortunately becomes in his mind, unfortunately, works in a factory. And so day by day, he depends on his son, Leo, who makes drawings of him. And in those drawings, he's, either fighting dragons, or he's a superhero or something in those drawings. And author uses those drawings as his days go on. He kind of fantasizes about those drawings. So he'll see himself as the hero in the factory working, or he'll see himself as the race car driver as he's on his way to work. And those fantasies that he has gets him through day by day. Going into that darker side of it, there's also the fact that he at one time did struggle with alcoholism, and how one of the antagonists in the story is himself. He starts to see a younger version of himself that's telling him to come back to where things are easier, where you don't have to put in that work to get day by day. Just, come have a drink, or come, you don't have to go to work today. Just, sit around, do nothing, And I think that with all of us, we have those moments in time where things aren't going the way that you think they should, or that you believe they should, or those dreams and aspirations kind of die out a little, and you have those low points in life where you're trying to figure out how to get by. And some people, they do the self-medicating, they don't have anyone to talk to, anywhere to go. And so this book kind of goes into that. Even when it comes to his marriage, it's kind of in shambles, which, I know for a fact many have gone through that as well. And so all of that together is weighing on him. And it goes into, how that weight is affecting him.
Yeah, that is pretty relatable. I think everybody in some form or another experienced depression and experience those moments of, kind of floundering and trying to figure out what to do. I know myself, I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
So take some time to work through all that, right? Definitely something I'm going to be reading. I enjoy experiencing things like that through the lenses of others to see how they cope and everything like that. So it's definitely an interesting one to me.
Yeah, definitely. And and like I said, it definitely dives into the darker side. So don't be don't be surprised if it doesn't, show that light at the end of the tunnel that we all hope to see it sometimes. This definitely hits that nerve of, oh man, this is pretty dark. So so definitely, when you read it, don't be surprised about that.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Well, we're kind of on that topic. Does the writing kind of help you with your own mental process and your own mental health and stuff, especially something like The Last Night?
Definitely. So like I said before, when writing that one especially in particular, I looked at some of the instances that have happened in my own life, and I said, I knew what I did to get around it, but what if I didn't? Or what if I didn't take this turn, or get into writing? Like, even though this book is fiction, I know that there are people that go through the exact same things that I did, or worse, or even if it's not worse, one of the things I always say is something that I can get over real quick, maybe the worst day of someone else's life. And so using myself as a tool for the writings of this book, helped me, one, to so where some writers will have like a writer's block. It wasn't as hard writing this book, because I just used myself in the story. And yes, going into, you said, depression and things of that nature, writing definitely has, in all my stories, I put myself, little pieces of myself in them. And one of the things that like I said, when I first started writing, it was probably one of, if not part of, one of the worst times of my life. And getting that stuff out and writing it down and writing it on paper and creating those stories where there was a light at the end of the tunnel, where I'm writing it out, definitely helped. Doing that every single time I felt that depression hit got me through many days where I thought, okay, well, I don't know what to do right now. And I've hit the gym as many times as I can. What else can I do? And writing was that piece of the puzzle that I said, okay, this is it. But another piece too is it was actually seeking the help. Many people kind of have that stigma of, I don't want to go actually seek help or seek a therapist, psychologist, whatever the case may be, and definitely do that. Don't ignore, even though we've grown in that area a lot, as the whole nation has, but definitely that stigma still exists, and people in their own mind are like, I hate to say it, but I'm not crazy. I'm not going to go talk to someone. I'm not going to go do this. Do it. Definitely talk to someone, whether it be family, whether it be actually seeking the professional help, or whatever the case may be, or just a friend, but definitely talk to people.
Yeah, 100%. I personally can't stress that enough of, if you're struggling mentally or just in general, seek help, talk to people, see who is there to support you. Locally, there's doctors you can reach out to, therapists, there's usually a behavioral health clinic nearby, or there's the online options. And yeah, I 100%, I can't suggest that enough of, if you're struggling, seek help. And that stigmatism that you're talking about of people saying, like, I'm not going crazy, or I am not struggling, or mental health isn't real. That's a common one too.
Right.
Is really important to talk about. Just letting people know that there are other people that struggle. It's one of those things, like you were saying, struggling to get up and start the day and continue on can be its own slog. So yeah, and recognizing that is super important, because it lets other people realize that there's more going on, and that more people are going through something similar. Not necessarily the same thing, because we all experience our own unique version of the world, but we do experience
Right.
similar things.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you were talking about, you don't really have to outline or anything because you use a lot of personal life experiences. So, are there hot and cold moments for writing for you? Like, you struggle writing sometimes because a lot of it is kind of internal like that, or is it all just very easy and natural?
So it's funny because I'm actually going through the cold moments now. At one time it was a lot easier because like I was going through a lot of it. What's funny is that in my books, I almost work backwards, right? If I can see the ending of a book, then I can write all the way up to the ending, right? And it's kind of weird way of doing it, but that's I'll think of the ending of it first and then write up to it. In recent, because I'm currently working on 3 books at one time. Like, so what happens is I'll have an idea and I'll write it down. I have an idea, write it down. And I've gotten to a point with my current writings where I don't know where I'm going anymore. And it's mostly because I have grown in certain ways, I am getting stuck on. So I wanted to change my route, trying to dive into, the fantasy, the romance, different genres. And it's actually got me stuck. And I like it because it's making me think in other ways that I wasn't before. So that has gotten me to that cold moment now. Whereas before it was just hot. Everything was just clicking. I could, write a book about depression. Easy. I've been through that. I got that, write a book about, like in the Concrete Power series where it was mostly about, they work for a law firm and they're going through, certain murder mystery as well as some action is thrown in there throughout. I could do that easily, Now going into these different genres, it's like, I got to put my thinking cap on here. So it's more recently, it's been a little that cold season has come where I'm running into that writer's block. But it's part of the journey of being a writer, and I'm enjoying it so far. So I'm learning about pacing as well. Going into like the being hot, I was so anxious in writing them and putting those books out there that I've learned that, okay, there are certain things in pacing of a story that you have to learn as well that I didn't know. So putting all the things that I've learned together now in these next series of books, if you read from when I first put my first published book all the way up until what's going to come in the future, you'll even be able to see how the writing has grown.
Yeah, pacing's kind of a tough one to get used to. Personally, my writing is very short fiction, flash fiction, or maybe a couple thousand words. But and that's because I don't know how to pace. I'll be 100% honest. I very much excel in like the poetry, prose, and short form, and everything, and not full length. So I can relate to the pacing struggles. But it sounds like you're working it out. One of the things I was going to ask you about was what you do with if you hit a writing block. But it sounds like you're kind of working through that, and I've heard that as a way to work through it, which is what you're doing, which is take a break and let something naturally come. And yeah, so while we're on this topic, any advice for someone wanting to get into writing or has written but they don't know if they want to like take the next step into trying to publish a work, or basically new to the author, let's put it that way?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that I have told some of the other folks that have found out that I have authors, and even folks that I've spoke with that they're also new authors, they're like, I guess I've taken just one further step than they have, is that one, put it out there. That's number one. Like you can second guess and yourself 100 times over. Just go for it. Like I said, I had these writings for a long time and did nothing with them. Just kept writing. And one day I just said, you know what? I'm going to put it out there. That's the first. The second thing is you're going to have people that will bring negativity. When it comes to that, always face that with a positive. For example, now I've seen where some new authors are running into when it comes to their book covers, because now we live, fortunately enough, in a world of technology. And there's two sides to that, right? You've got those that hate it, those that love it. When it comes to, like I was going to say, book covers, my book covers were AI generated book covers for the most part. And I ran into a gentleman who I guess had things to say about that. There are plenty of people that can draw for you, things of that nature. I said, okay, well, please point me in their direction. Because one of the things that I do believe is that we can all help each other, right? And I don't want to take away from someone else that could possibly help me, and then I can help them get their, ability to draw. That I can't draw, all right? All right. I'm not good at that. And so I went with the best way that I knew how. And so, well, of course, I asked, and this person did not have an answer for me. And so you're going to have people that will come and they'll have everything negative to say, but they won't have a solution. And don't let that get you down. One of the things because with that, I said, okay, well, even though he didn't have a solution, but he does have a point. And so for one of my future books that I'm writing, and that is a story that's going to go into the kind of like that realm of fantasy type. I want to say partnered with some of the youths in the community because I want it to be a novel or a visual novel, right? Where maybe every 10 to 20 pages, there is a picture that goes along with the story. And I want them to draw whatever. I'm giving them the background of what the story is going to be. And I want you to draw what you imagine or what you see here. And so right now they're working on it. I've got about five or six. One of them, I'm not too sure if he's actually going to be able to draw it, but like I told them, I don't care if it's just stick figures, right? I want you to draw what your imagination sees right now, what you see this character doing in this page. And so now that book is going to be not only hand drawn by youth, but also I have incorporated what he actually said, where I'm getting folks that can draw or even maybe can't. And so not only is it something to kind of bring folks together and also showcase their abilities, So yeah, definitely take those good or possibly negatives and turn it into something good.
Yeah, you're taking that criticism and turning it into positivity, which is definitely what you did. You took that criticism, you realized, yeah, maybe not a good idea to be using AI art. And then you're like, well, what can I do to fix that? Yeah, there you go. You found local youths to help you out. And yeah, that's great. It's I think that's a creative fix to the problem and also an encouraging one because you're encouraging other people to be creative.
I'm excited about it, mostly because, like you said, I'm getting the interactive of the youth, getting them to be a part of something. Hopefully that can be bigger. And then one other thing that I would encourage other authors to do is learn from others, right? There are a lot of independent authors out here that are like dying to help you. And I was surprised, like getting into this, I had no idea that this community was as tight knit and as helpful as they are. Any question that I've ever had, I could easily go on any social media and ask any author and they will, I haven't had one yet that have said, nah, I don't feel like, all right, I don't think every single one has helped me. So it's interesting getting into this that I would have never imagined how friendly, how helpful, how just the camaraderie just is amongst authors. It's kind of wild to even get into it. But yeah, definitely ask questions and definitely accept any help that you can gain.
Yeah, 100%. Your peers are very much resources and reaching out to others and everything like that. I know Indie Bubble is eventually wanting to get a Discord going where fans and other creatives can all talk and everything. So that kind of network is always good. Just having that kind of fallback and stuff. And I know there are famous authors out there that will always try to help out when they hear of a problem. The one that comes to mind is Brandon Sanderson. I always hear about that guy doing something for other creatives. So, do you read? Do you like to read? Let's go to that one.
So it's interesting that because that question has come more than once, which is funny to me because me myself, I was never really a novel reader, right? I was a comic book guy, right? So I would read tons of comic books, and I was more of a short story guy, and then I would read things that were like, my one of my friends would always say, you're a guy that has a ton of useless facts And that came from just reading random things, right? So yeah, I was a reader, but not like a novel reader. It was just, short things. And so in reading like comic books and things like that, I'm one, it amazes me that now we've got these like Marvel movies and DC, because back then, you had like the really good movies like Batman with Michael Keaton, So now, moving forward, you've got all these different movies and things like that are out that, it amazes me. But one of the things that I would always read is like National Geographic, or, things that had to do with space or how things are made or things like that, But it definitely got me to a point where I am now of actually writing in, like you and I spoke before about how my books aren't necessarily the longest books, because I know for myself, being a comic book reader, comic book isn't, the longest. You've got maybe 20 pages and then you got to get the next one, And so I kind of took that and kind of used it, with my books, even though they're a lot longer than 20 pages. But I know with me, I like to think that, okay, there are other folks I know that have to be like myself, where you want to read it, you want to kind of get to a point where it hooks you, and then you want to see how it ends. You want to get to the beginning, middle, and end fairly quickly, not too quick, but it goes back into that pacing part of it, So finding that sweet spot where those books can kind of not be too short, but not be too long.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point. I actually know several people that struggle, or not struggle, but they're intimidated by books once they get over like the 500 to 600 page mark.
Mm-hmm.
They see that and they just think it's impossible to do, right? Like, I know one friend of mine was wanting to get into a series and it was 1,000 pages. And that was extremely intimidating to them. And they eventually did, and they enjoyed the series, but they put it off for quite some time before they started it. So yeah, I completely understand looking at something like that where it's 1,000 pages and just kind of going, whoa, I don't know if I can commit that to that, I mean, personally, there's shows that have 1,000 episodes that I'm looking at going, nope, I don't have time for that. And it's a very similar thing with like books. Yeah, I can't work that into my day schedule. Like, yeah. Do you have any tics or things that you come back to and use probably more than you should? Any words that you probably use more often than you should? Some pet words, I guess you could call them.
Let me think. I don't think so, and mostly because. So when I'm writing, it's kind of interesting, because when I write my stories, I kind of write them outside of myself, if that makes sense, right? I almost try to go into the story and think in the way that the characters would think, right? So I don't think there are words that I have a tick about. Someone that's read my books, they could probably tell me better, But yeah, I try to. So each character that I have in these books, I try to dive into that character as I'm writing. And so if it's let's just using some of the character, like in My Good Little Girls, the main character is a serial killer. And so in my mind, as I'm writing it, I'm thinking, okay, how would this character talk, right? How would this character think? And so that would be outside of the way that I hope, outside of the way that I think, right? And so, or like in the, in The Last Night, how would this, main character or his son or his wife, how would they talk? How would they think? What words would they use? And so I don't think that that's a thing, because I'm constantly switching my brain functions from my own to these characters.
Yeah, I can see that changing, your writing style and everything, because I know I have a specific way of talking. So yeah, I can definitely see characters having a different, style from the way I talk and everything. So yeah, no, 100%. So you said one of your upcoming books that you're writing is in a fantasy setting.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that, going from the brief look I had of the other books, a more urban or realistic setting, to fantasy setting? How does that feel going back and forth?
It's harder for me, One reason is because most of the stories that I've, like you said, wrote so far have had that more realistic setting. Going into one where it's not as realistic, even though I've always liked the fantasy like movies, I've never been one to actually create a fantasy world. And so trying to figure out a way to create originality with that is a little more difficult, because as soon as I start going into it, I start thinking about like, okay, well, I don't know if folks even know this movie now, but I start thinking about like movies like Willow or, Harry Potter, things like that, in which this stuff has already been created. So what can I create in which it's an original, And that's the part that is kind of a little more on the difficult side for me. But like I said, I enjoy it because it's making me expand my own ways of thinking. On one hand, it's making it so that I can basically do whatever I want, right? Because I don't have to worry about, how a car actually drives, how people actually talk to each other. On the other hand, it's like, well, how do I make it so that these people can talk and it's an original way of the people doing things? But it's fun because I'm using my imagination. So it's a tough journey, but in a good way.
Well, yeah, it's forcing you out of your comfort zone, right?
Right.
Like you're more comfortable with a realistic setting, and it's encouraging you to think outside that box, right?
Exactly.
Okay, this one might be a little bit more challenging for you. Which of your books should someone pick up if you can only recommend one book that you currently have out? Which one is it?
That was actually easier than I thought it would be. It would be The Last Night. That's easy.
Perfect.
Yeah, it would definitely be that.
That one's like we were talking, nice and not short, but it's a nice meal, I would say. We were talking, it's around like 160 pages, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a nice, short, easy story. But it definitely makes you think, and that's the part about it that I really like. Like I said, I put a lot of my little points of myself into it. And I think it's one that would open some eyes, some of those eyes that we talked about earlier, where, there are those that think, oh, this isn't a real thing, or this is or I don't need this, or whatever the case may be. I think it's able to touch those, the parts of a person that you don't really think about. And it goes into that whole, where the story starts and where the story ends. It's like, man, yeah, I kind of was there at one time in my life, or I know someone that probably was there, and that's why I think that's the one that, if there's out of all of them, definitely pick that one up and just give it a shot, check it out. And I think it's one that people would enjoy.
Perfect. And just to kick it back a little bit, so I know we talked about how your writing is an outlet, right? It kind of helps you channel what's going on in your life and everything. Is it hard to balance that? Like when you're trying to go about your day to day and then also write, is it hard to balance life with your writing, or how does that work for you?
So I'm going to say yes and no. Again, because we live in a world now where technology is literally at our fingertips. When I have an idea, there's times where a piece of a story will pop into my mind when I'm at work. And luckily, one thing that we all have is a cell phone. And I'll go into my notes. I even have Word on my phone. And so I'll go into there and I'll start typing out this part of a story. Now, of course, later on I can get back to it and, iron out whatever. But I'll at least throw that idea in there that way. Okay, this doesn't just leave me because I thought about this at, let's just say 10 o'clock in the morning and I'm at work and I don't get off till 5, So as the days go on, or if I'm even out and, somewhere if I'm shopping in Safeway and I see something, I'm like, that'd be something to add to this story as well. I'll just pull out my phone to the story and then later on edit whatever I need to edit to make it fit. And so it's interesting that I went from writing them in notepads that I had to carry in a back pocket to where now it's evolved to everything already digitally, just throwing it into a phone. It also helps me relax. So when night comes and I'm ready to go to sleep and I'm like, okay, well, let me just start writing a little bit and eventually I'm going to fall asleep. So it definitely helps in all avenues.
That's great. And I know having that kind of outlet's super important.
Mhm.
So here's one that I was going to ask you earlier and forgot about. How hard is it for you to come up with your titles?
Huh. Um, so it's been a mixed bag, right? It's so the last night, and this comes up with that because it's funny you ask that question. It was actually supposed to have a different title. And the reason being was because it was originally supposed to be called The Final Night. And the reason why I was going to call it that was because I actually first thought of The Last Night, and I Googled The Last Night to see if there was any other books or whatever called that. And there's a ton. And so I said, okay, well, there's a ton of books called, there's even like a Transformers movie that was called The Last Night, right? And so it was like, geez. And what happened was I ended up forgetting, which goes into why I put every idea into the phone now and make sure that I end up forgetting what the title that I came up with was. And I ended up going with The Last Night anyway. And so that was one of the things that I started realizing that I need to figure out what these titles are going to be. And so that they don't, if you're looking for my books, you can put in a title and my books will be the ones that you find. So it is a little hard because you want to be original, right? You don't want to copy anybody else or put something out there that someone else has already put out there, or, kind of like, just having a car named Car, you want something that is going to be original and that people will say, oh, I know that book, that's by whoever. And so it's kind of like your own brand. And that part is a little tough to think of a name. Like I said, my first series of books, that was a little easier because I had the idea and what I wanted it to be called in my head already. Then it's gotten significantly tougher as I've put books out, because it's like, geez, what am I going to call this? And I can't put a title that's like 10 words long. So what can I think of? So yeah, it is getting a little tougher and tougher as I'm, writing them.
Do you ever have like your friends or early readers or anyone that you have like proofread it? You ever ask them what they think the title of the book should be?
Yes. So one of the books that I'm actually writing now, because as I said before, there's 3 of them that I'm working on. But one of them, I literally there's 2 friends in particular that I have read them. And they always give me their feedback. I'm like, look, good or bad, tell me what you think. Well, in this book in particular, I was like, look, I have no clue what this thing is going to be called. Right? And I need your help on a name for this book because I have no clue. And so the both of them were just throwing names at me, until I finally one came up with one. I'm like, you know what? I like that. I'm going with that one. So yeah, I've definitely done that. And they were pretty good at, coming up with names for it. So I might have to use them in the future, maybe even put them as a contributing author or contributing in a author page, because sometimes, you need that help of like you said earlier, your peers to, come up with something that you just can't. And in that case, I just couldn't come up with a name.
That's understandable. So this one's kind of a fun one. Have you had to do any research or looking into a subject while you're writing any of your books? Whether that's a process or something. Is there stuff that you had to research or look into?
Yes. So there was 2 times I've had to do that. In my first series of books, I had to look up cities because when I first wrote them on, like I said, on those notepads, I didn't have actual names for places. Right? I just knew what I wanted them technically to look like and things like that. So when I started putting this into the actual digital and going back into those friends, I had them read the books, and then they're like, okay, well, where are these places? And I'm like, I'm not really too sure. I just see a big city, and they're like, okay, well, maybe you need to look at cities that kind of match what you're describing. That way, the reader can okay, yeah, I've heard of that place, or I've seen that place before, or I've watched it. I'm like, okay. So that was one time I had to actually look up and research. Okay, what place actually matches kind of this. The other time was again, going back to the last night in that series. His son has an illness. When I first wrote that book, the illness was not explained, because I didn't want to dive too far into it. I didn't want to touch too far onto something I didn't know anything about. And so that was another time where I had to actually research, okay, what do these symptoms look like? What does a person with this specific illness, what would they experience? And because in the book at first, I didn't have the illness tied to anything. And so when I actually put what I had already, wrote out into the research, into, I'm Googling stuff, I'm looking at medical, I'm asking some of my friends that are in the medical, hey, if a person is experiencing this, and this, what is that the closest to? And once I did that, I was able to actually find an illness that would fit into the story and that would match what his son is going through.
That would definitely be one that you'd have to research, right? That way you can properly convey things that are going on. So yeah, that makes sense. Same thing with the cities.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit more of the idea of just kind of let it naturally happen. Of course, I'm really bad about using our current world and then just taking it and turning it upside down. So there's some references and stuff, and yeah, but I like that because even if we're looking at like fantasy and stuff like that, you're still looking for things you can relate to, right? Or something that you can understand. That way you have a point of context. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
And that, also kind of goes into like we were talking about earlier, the reading, because that's right up my alley. I'm a guy who likes the whys, and why does this work, or why do people think that way, or why, right? And so even with that, it gave me an opportunity to read about things that I would have never read before, especially using some of the settings that I ended up going with. I'm like, this is a nice place that I've never even heard of before. This is a nice place that I've, you see certain things on TV or in books or in magazines, and they're usually kind of the same places over and over. You think of a big city, you think of New York or, Miami or whatever. But there are other places that kind of, okay, I didn't know this place looked like that or was like this. All right, nice. So yeah, it definitely opened my eyes to a few new places as well. And then when, like I said, going into, the different types of ailments that a person can experience, like there are things that I'm like, whoa, I hope that never actually happens to me, So yeah, it was a pretty decent experience, just even in that research alone, getting to learn a lot more.
So while we're on the subject of like cities and stuff, and we're talking about research, we're just going to segue into world building, especially like with the fantasy novel that you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
How different is that? Because I can only assume you're having to get out the conspiracy board behind you and start like laying down ideas and stuff and go, well, this connects to this connects to that, and like, how's that going?
In my first series of books, I kind of had to build, because like you had said earlier, I wanted there to be a city setting that could almost be any city, right? But it was still easier because, like you said, in the world today, you've pretty much got an idea of what a major city looks like, right? Or what the hustle and bustle of it is and things like that. Going into a fantasy world where you're basically, starting from scratch. Okay, what is this kingdom gonna look like? Or what is this, this little village or this, rural portion and things like that gonna actually, be? What does their currency look like? What is their fun places to go? What are they? It's been fun for me creating all of these things to make this world one where you can kind of dive into it, and it can become real in your mind. You can see that part of it is creating those visual images only with words. right? That part has been a lot of fun. I'm starting to learn how to put more details into how things are working, right? How this town is working, how their money looks or feels, or things like that. So it's pretty cool. I must admit, I'm starting to see how you can get into the fantasy genre and create and kind of just fall in love with it and continue in that pathway. I will eventually get back into, of course, the more reality based, because that's just where, like you said, I feel more comfortable there. But I'm very interested to see that once this is done, how that reaction to it is and how their feedback is. Like, what did you think about this world that I created? And tell me what you think, here. What can I do better? What would you have liked to have seen? And what would you have liked to have seen added to it? Being able to be that original and that, I guess to say, animated with what you're doing is pretty neat so far.
So, kind of continuing that train of thought, do you read book reviews? Like, do you read every review that you see online about your books?
I definitely do. I definitely do.
So if they have feedback or anything, it's definitely something that they can leave a review on on Amazon, I'm guessing, and anywhere else that you find
Oh,
reviews,
definitely.
and you'll read
I,
that.
I I read every single one. One, I want to know if you enjoyed it the most, right? I want to know if you picked up whichever book you've picked up and you liked it. If you didn't like it, okay, tell me why you didn't like it. I want to know. That's where that's where I found out about pacing. It was because there was a gentleman that had picked up one of my books. Matter of fact, he had picked up my first book, and he said he loved the whole story, liked it. He's like, however, and I'm like, okay, this is the part I want to hear. Like, give me the however. However, he wished that there was more explanations of where they were going, more description of where they were at. I'm like, huh, okay. And then going into other books, it's like, okay, well, I liked this, but I'm like, okay, yeah, give me the because I want to hear that, because it helps me. It helps me to grow, helps me to become better. One thing that I've heard is that my description of the characters is pretty good, so I know that to a degree I got that part down pat, right? But there are other parts that I myself, when I hear certain things, I'm like, yeah, okay, I can see where you are getting that criticism, constructive criticism, and I like that, and I'm gonna work on that. So yeah, definitely every review I read it, and I appreciate every single one, good, bad, indifferent. I love it.
So just to circle back a little bit on the writing process, do you prefer to show or tell, like with your descriptions and like the world building? As we were talking about, you said you're working on the world building and everything like that. So are you working through the show and tell, or how does that work for you?
Kind of working through it. I think that I've got to work on figuring out how to. So when it comes to people, I'm good at being able to describe, their demeanor, because I've worked around a lot of people, and half of my life was talking to people, and so I've learned people pretty good. Being able to describe a setting, not so much, right? and that comes from working inside for so long. You don't really you see the same four walls all the time, and so that part I'm working on, trying to figure out how people like to hear or like to see or like to read how a setting is. Things such as, if the wind blows, what does that wind feel like? How does in some cases, how does the area smell, or what, things that you experience when you're going to someplace new and you experience them, but it's like those things that you take for granted, right? Walk into a new place, like if you're at the beach, you can smell the sand and the salt water and things like that, right? How does that feel? Those are the things that I have to actually work on, so that when those portions of a book come up, the person can read it and feel like they're there themselves,
I do. And so when people read your book, any of your books, really, what are you hoping they get from that? I mean, I know with last night we talked about there's kind of a deeper exploration into mental health. And so, what are you hoping the readers will take away from your books?
Yeah, just the enjoyment of it. Like you said with the last night, we pretty much touched on what I hope that you get from that. That's one that I actually want you to actually walk away with something. When it comes to the Concrete Power series or even My Good Little Girls, I want you to enjoy them almost like you're going to the movies. That feeling of I've read something and I liked it, and I love the story and I want more of it. That's what I want to happen. Honestly speaking, I want people to enjoy these stories so much that I've probably actually given away more books than I've actually sold, right? Because I just want you to read them and tell me what you think. Hopefully you liked it. Hopefully you enjoyed, reading it. And I want people to have something that they want to read and possibly read it more than one time, just like I said, just like a movie. You can watch a movie 2 and 3 times in a row. That's where I want the books to be, where you put it down. You're like, oh man, I want to read that series again. Or I like this book so much, I want to read it again. That's what I hope, that people, it just brings you some sort of joy or some sort of, entertainment outside of just the normal social media and things of that nature, just bring something old but new to your life.
So, as we're starting to wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to cover or talk about?
Sure. The only thing I would definitely say is that one of the things that I've learned in writing these books, and even with you and I, is that be positive in as many aspects of your life as you can. Like I said, starting off with these writings, I did not think I would ever do anything with them. I'm like, hey, these are just my stories, I'm writing them out, and they're just, something that I'm doing. I didn't think anything of it. And then my mindset shifted. I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to, make sure that even if no one ever read these books, they're there so that one day maybe someone will. And fortunately for me, people have, people have enjoyed them. People have. And that's that positivity that you should bring to yourself. Stop doubting. Don't doubt the things that you can do. Don't doubt the things that you're looking to do, the future, things like that, because you never know. As long as you bring that positivity with you, no matter what you do, chances are 9 times out of 10, there's going to be a positive outcome to it. And so, yeah, definitely bring that positivity to your life, no matter what. Just definitely bring that with you.
That's an excellent message. And I just have to say this, Sean, thank you for being the first guest on Words with Wordsmiths. I greatly appreciate you.
Oh, man, I appreciate it. I'm thankful for the opportunity, truly humbled that you thought of me to be the first guest. I don't even, as you know, I didn't even know I was the first guest at first. So this is awesome. And I appreciate you, 100% for having me on. My words can't express how grateful I am for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's great. It's exciting, and hopefully we'll have many more. And I will probably try to keep in touch with you because I want to see how things go with you, and especially your upcoming books.
Awesome. So, hey, I'm looking forward to it. I'm always here. You can get in touch with me anytime.